Are you torn between carrying a fixed blade versus a folder for your everyday carry? Well, today we're going to go over the pros and the cons of each, helping you make the best choice for your needs. Now, before we begin, I know I'm inviting the keyboard warriors into the comment section, and that's okay. The only thing that I would ask is that you be fair. This is a highly controversial subject. It doesn't matter where I go, people are always arguing their point. They have found the best knife. Good for you. This video is for people who don't want to spend a ton of money to find out through experience what they do or do not need. And before you get in there and you start saying monkey see, monkey do, and that's a bad thing, it's not. Let's just be real. If a guy is smart enough to listen to somebody they trust and that has the experience and they want to skip all the BS, good for them. There are billions of knives on the planet, some good, some bad, and there's a lot of ugly. For the purposes of today, we are going to be talking about knives that are in the good category, which are adequate for the task at hand. This is not a knife war. I have done videos in the past, and y'all all know I don't believe that there's such a thing as the perfect knife. Short of you being Donnie Dust, now Donnie Dust and I are friends. I'm not gonna say that we are best friends, but if he were sitting with me today, he would tell you anything that you can come up primitive knife-wise, well, what's on the table is gonna be better than that. Now, I did not bring all of my knives with me today because I don't want my wife to know how many knives I actually have. Hello, my name is JJ and I am a gear whore. However, I don't have as many knives as some collectors by any means. What you see on the table, I have used, and I have brought knives that were significant in my journey. Later, I'm gonna share my experiences and how I got to where I am today. But before we get into that, let's talk about what is an EDC knife. For most people, an everyday carry knife is something that they open Amazon boxes with or letters. Contractors probably use them to sharpen pencils. Military guys probably use them to open up their MREs. A lot of blue collar guys, they have a knife which is sacrificial, which they can beat to death. And yes, that is a thing. For the most part, we just have a knife because it's convenient. And I am old enough that when I was a child, we were actually able to carry pocket knives in school. You just weren't a man if you didn't have a knife back then. And I don't know what kind of world we're living in today where you can't do that now. I've got to agree, I don't think that kids today should be carrying knives to school. All I'm saying is that it was different back then and there were far less incidents reported back in the day. Perhaps a sociologist or a psychologist can get in the comment section and enlighten us. But I still hold on to that and I still carry a knife, and yes, I consider it to be in my top 3 things to carry. Now, a lot of people are gonna say, oh no, there's other things that you need to carry, like your keys, your wallet, and your phone. Duh, you're gonna have that stuff on you at all times. I'm talking about things besides that. A knife is definitely in my top 3. And I can't think of a single day that goes by unless I'm sick, and even then I probably do, where I don't use a knife. I use a knife all the time, and I take what I carry very seriously. And I'll get into that a little bit later, but right now what I want to talk about is the pros and the cons of fixed versus folder. So let's talk about fixed blades first. What is a pro of carrying a fixed blade? Well, one thing that I can say for sure is durability. The more robust a knife is, the less likely that it's going to fail. There are certainly less moving parts in a fixed blade, and so with less parts, less likely to fail. The second thing about a fixed blade knife is strength. For heavy duty tasks, it is far superior. And I think the third advantage to carrying a fixed blade knife for everyday carry is ease of maintenance. In my younger days, sure, it was kind of like more of a hobby. I would take the knife apart with my little tools and I would use my little pin oil dropper to lubricate it and clean it and even modify it. Now that I'm older, I just don't have time to do all that. So for me, it's more convenient to have a fixed blade because it's just easier to maintain. Which brings up the cons. Well, for one, it could be, depending on your choice, the size and the weight. Which leads into the second con, which is your method of carry. You'll notice on this knife that I have a dangler so that I can wear it in the wintertime so that it's below my jacket and it's easy for me to access. I have other carry options which I can wear as scout or cross draw. Some options have clips like this that will actually turn, which allow you to wear it strong side, cross draw, or scout. Or if you want to attach it to your bag, for example. And then there's also the option of neck carry as well. The thing about a fixed blade is that it's much harder for you to hide it. And there have been times in my life where I was asked to leave a place just because people were freaking out that I had a knife. And as far as gray man goes, that's a really bad thing, and that's why I quit carrying like that. Which leads into the third con, which I would say is legal restrictions. Now in Georgia, if you want to carry a samurai sword, you can do that. God bless America. However, being an instructor, I go to other states and I want to make sure that I'm complying, really because I just don't want the hassle of going to jail or getting a ticket, or even potentially losing the knife. If you're like me, you have a lot of money invested in your knives, and I just don't want to be throwing money away. Plus, you just need to be respectful if you're in somebody else's house. It's just good manners. And now we can dive into folding knives. What are the pros? Well, number one, I would say compactness. It's real easy to fold one of these up, throw it into your pocket, and it's like it's not even there. Now you'll notice on none of these folders do I have any kind of clip, and there's a reason for that. I've had way too many. In fact, I've had 3 Benchmades where the vines took them from me when I was in the woods. I don't really care about, that it will wear out my pants. I care more about I lost the knife. But I'm getting into cons and I need to get back on track. You'll just notice that none of my folders have a clip on them. The second pro I would say would be just convenience. Take this multi-tool, for example. It has a lot of stuff attached to it. And yeah, there are times when I can say, yeah, they are super convenient to have. Are they the best tool for the job? Absolutely not. But when you're in a pinch, having something like this can be a game changer. I mean, let's get real. If you didn't have the optimal tool, but you had one of these, I mean, that would just be a force multiplier. Which brings up my third pro, which I would say is variety. Let's just face it, there's a knife out there for everyone, and they are everywhere, and they are readily available. But that certainly takes us into our cons, which number one, I would say, is durability. Can you baton with a knife like this? You certainly can. However, anybody who has the experience will tell you, number one, the knife cannot be locked. It has to be unlocked. And then you have to be very careful because there are safety concerns when you do it. In fact, most survival instructors are going to tell you, unless you absolutely have to, you shouldn't be batoning a knife anyway. Now, I should mention that if you take care of the knife will certainly take care of you. But a lot of that boils down to experience and being able to overcome the deficiency of whatever tool it is that you're running. But these are certainly not as durable as their counterparts. Which brings up the second con, which is strength. Even if you have an old school knife that's been around for a long time, it does have a breaking point. And quality shouldn't be reflected in the amount of money that you spend. A good quality, adequate knife doesn't have to cost a ton of money. But I think it's fair to say that in some cases, knives just aren't as good as they used to be. And I think a lot of that has to do with the type of steel that we're using these days. But I can certainly say that this blade right here has done more than I should have ever asked it to do. For its size and its weight, this knife is extremely strong. However, there are things that I would not do with this knife that I would do with a fixed blade. And that brings up my third con, maintenance. These things are a pain to maintain. Like I said, unless that's a hobby of yours and you actually enjoy doing it. These days, I'm all about simplifying. The way I look at it, this is one of the most important tools in the toolbox, and so I want something that's easy to take care of.
At any moment, all electronics could cease to function. This includes your car, your home, your business, and our entire electrical infrastructure. Learn how you can protect yourself from a massive electrical disturbance today. Visit www.empro.com or call 833-EMP-PRO4 today.
And now that we've discussed the pros and the cons of each, I want to talk about my personal journey, my evolution, where I've come from and where I am today. So when I first started, my grandfather bought me this knife set. And I want to emphasize set, because back in the day, the old timers, they had this thing called the 5-tool rule. No man would go off into the woods without having 5 tools. The first of which was an axe, a saw, a good belt knife, a jackknife, and then some kind of awl or curved blade. And I think that goes to show you the wisdom of that generation. They knew there was no such thing as the perfect tool, and so they had a variety of tools on them. Now, a lot of people are going to be wondering about this Air Force Pilot Survival Knife. Why does it look waxy? Well, that's because it has a bunch of wax on it. I retired this knife a few years back because it's very, very special to me. And the truth of the matter is, by today's standards, this knife wouldn't pass at all. In fact, a lot of people are going to point out the fact that this is a rat tang knife. In other words, it's not a full tang knife. The blade itself goes through the middle of the handle and it ends here on the pommel. They would also bring up the finger guard. You'll notice that I have modified this one. I cut off the very top of it just so that when I was batoning with it, I wouldn't, break it. A lot of people are going to say, well, it's got a clip point. It has this almost useless saw on it. I mean, how many of you are actually going to be cutting yourselves out of an aluminum airplane? In the list of cons associated with this blade, if you go on the internet, there's just so many. However, that being said, I used this blade for over 20 years of my life with no problem whatsoever. Now, I've got to be honest with you, I was mad when my grandfather gave me these. Why? Because I wanted the Rambo survival knife. And because I had a lot of grit as a young lad, I went ahead and saved up my money and I bought one anyway, which I promptly threw against a tree and broke it the very first time. You can imagine my disappointment. The thing is, these knives were given to me by somebody that had experience. My grandfather was a frogman in World War II and he knew exactly what I needed. To me, there wasn't anything else anyway. It did everything that I needed it to do. Growing up on a tree farm, I threw it at trees, I batoned with it, I carved up animals and my food, and I did all of the things that a knife is supposed to do for you in the woods. And even having been a young kid, and then being a teenager, and then having known everything in the world in my 20s, I still didn't break this knife. And back then, we were taught how to use our tools properly. So if I didn't need to use the belt knife, I would use this knife. And all hunters are gonna tell you the same thing. I don't know how many deer I have skinned with this knife. I don't know how many fish I have prepared with this knife. And as you can see, I've actually had to modify the tip because I've stuck it in places I shouldn't have been sticking it, like trying to get back in the windows or the doors if I came home after dark. Point being is this knife was in my pocket the majority of the time, and I would have considered this to be my everyday carry blade. Now, if I was in the woods, this would have been my everyday carry blade, and I would have used it more than I would have this one. But I can tell you the truth, between these two blades, I was pretty much able to do everything that I needed to do, and I was able to do it for 2 decades. Now, like I said, when you're in your 20s, you know everything, and that's where I started my journey into buying as many different knives as I could. You read the magazines. We used to read magazines back in the day. You read the books. I still read books. You would watch the TV shows, and you would watch your friends as well. Now all of a sudden becomes the race to buy as many as you possibly can because you got to have a knife for this and for this and for this. Every time you learn a new skill set in bushcraft or fieldcraft or whatever discipline it is, you've got to have a new knife to perform that task. And the end result is you end up buying a lot of stuff that sits in a box. And I'm not even going to list names of knives that I purchased back in the day because it was all of them. Plus, back in the day when I was doing, reviews for companies, I was taking knives, I was testing them, and I was really lucky because I got to get my hands on a lot of really good knives, and I got to see what works and what doesn't work. Similar to how it is for me today in classes, there are lots of knives that I see that just break or don't work well, or the scales fall off of them, or I don't like the sheath option. And I think it's important and fair to say that I've seen some high quality, expensive name brand knives break as well. I've also seen a lot of, what I would consider crap knives do better than some of their counterparts. I would also say that I have seen some knives that you wouldn't expect to do well. For the majority of the time, that just goes back to how people are using the knife and somewhat a little bit of luck. Because every knife maker has had a limit at some point in time. Some knives just pass the test through experience, and that's why it becomes your EDC knife. It boils down to the fact that you actually trust that knife. And something else that needs to be said is, you know, I often go off and I do these challenges where I don't have a knife. And I'm just going to be honest with you, what you learn through that experience after having made, you know, a knife out of a Vienna sausage can lid or some glass or whatever it is that you find laying around is that, yeah, it's just easier to carry a knife. It makes you really appreciate having a blade on you at all times. It just makes things that much easier. And unless you've been in that place, you just don't know. I can take any knife on this table, despite the brand or the make or whatever, and I can make it work for me because I have experience with all of them. And it doesn't matter if we're talking, you know, saber grinds, or if we're talking Scandi grinds, or if we're talking full flat grinds, or even specialty grinds like this Scandivex. Or even if we're talking hollow grinds, which are the most popular choice and are considered to be the weakest. It really doesn't matter because I have experience with all of these grinds and I know what they can and can't do. The fact of the matter remains is that I would rather have any of these knives than whatever I could make with whatever's around me. Now, it wasn't until I got into my professional career where I was a SAR-1 where the type of knife that I carried was like super important. And that knife basically had to do anything and everything that I needed to do when it came to rescue. At that time, you had to have what we would call a bomb-proof knife, and that's where my Survive GSO 5.1 comes into play. This knife I have used for well over a decade, and it has done everything that I have ever asked it to do. And that includes the times that I beat the living crap out of this knife to get whatever I needed done. And I don't just mean wood. Somebody's life depended on what I carried, and so it was very important to me. And I've got to say, for the longest time, because when you're in a role like that I was for 14 years, you learn the importance and the value of your tools. And so when I retired, I tried to carry that into my personal life. And that's why I would carry knives like this Tops Bob or Fieldcraft knife, or this Benchmade 162-1. Now, one of the reasons why I brought the 162-1 into the equation is because a lot of people absolutely hate this knife. A lot of people say that the handles are too blocky and that they get hot spots from using it. One thing that I can say though is that with my experience in understanding the various grips that the guy designed into this knife, I have never found that to be true. In fact, I absolutely love this knife and I think that it's a great knife overall. Still, people are going to argue, well, the steel, it's a super steel stainless and it's got a really high Rockwell, and that's just ridiculous. Well, you're right, it is ridiculous, and ultimately that is the reason why I stopped carrying it, because one day I dropped the knife and it hit the only rock around me in 50 meters. It broke it and I had to reprofile it. And oh my God, it was really difficult for me to do that. But other than that, it was a great knife. And I would still say to this day that this is a great knife and I would be happy to have it in any challenge. However, as a first responder, one of our mottos was be prepared for the worst and hope for the best. So in this case, I learned a valuable lesson that, you know, the X factor happens. Sometimes accidents happen and there's nothing you can do to control it. And it was because of that that I went to a different style knife, one that had a slightly lower Rockwell. That also leads me into another caveat. Something that I want to talk about is trends in the industry or cycles in the industry. Because at times it's all about having the biggest, baddest, largest knife that you can have. And then it goes to being sensible and having something in the mid-range. And then currently right now we're on to having smaller knives. Now, one thing that I have found over my time is that small knives, well, they provide a whole lot of control. And some would even say that because of that, you are less likely to have an injury, which I think is total BS. You can injure yourself with a small knife just as bad as you could with a big knife. Ask me how I know. Now, as I get older, what I find is there's no such thing as a one-tool option. I tend to have multiple knives on me at the same time. And it's kind of ironic because I started out with that mentality with my grandfather when I was younger. And then I went through a period of learning, and now that I'm getting older and I have a lot of experience, I find that I'm gravitating back towards that mentality. There's just something to be said about having the right tool for the job. And I've also got to say too that, you know, every single blade that you choose to carry is going to be a compromise in general. For example, if you wanted to cut down a tree, you would much rather have a chainsaw. But that's just not practical for you to carry unless you're a smoke jumper or you work at a tree farm. When it comes to everyday carry, there's going to have to be a compromise made. And so that really goes back to, what is the mission? What does the environment dictate? Are you going to be near seawater? You probably want to have a stainless blade over a carbon blade. But like in my world, a lot of people prefer to have carbon blades on the off chance that you might actually have to make sparks to get a fire going. Oh man. I don't really believe in that method. It's possible you might have to do that. And then I've also got to say that well into my career as a survival instructor, gray man is another aspect that deserves some attention. When you got the big D swinging around, people take a notice, you know what I'm saying? It really boils down to, I don't want people knowing what I'm carrying. And there's no difference than hiding my firearm. In my personal opinion, it's just smarter to do that. A lot of people will take the stance of, you know, but hey, I'm showing it, and so therefore I'm not a target. And then there's guys like me that are saying he is the target. At any rate, you do you. And I feel myself getting excited, which means I need to come back on task. Where am I today? Something that I don't think gets talked about enough is the sheathing options. When I was younger, it was all about the leather, and as I've gotten older, it's all about the Kydex. Well, there's pros and cons to that as well. There's pros and cons to wearing it around your neck. There's pros and cons to wearing it on your belt. There's pros and cons to keeping it inside of your pack. Ultimately, you're going to have to decide what kind of sheathing option you have and how you're going to carry the blade and how fast you want access to it. You've also got to think about attachment points and how long is this material going to last? Will it break if it gets in the cold? How's it going to do if I'm in seawater? How's it going to perform when I put the knife back in and it's really bloody? Will it stick if it's cold? Does the sheath actually help it to rust? Can I carry other tools to help support the knife on the platform? And when it comes to the folders, there's all kinds of things to talk about. Like take multi-tools, for example. I find these to just be weird in my pockets. Like they just don't fit right unless you wear it in some kind of sheath on your belt. Me personally, I like carrying mine in my pack, but I just find that it's difficult for me to warrant carrying it because I don't want to carry it. There's also something to be said about when a tool is extremely heavy and it's in your pocket all the time, it wears the pocket out. And let's just face facts, if you don't want to carry it, if you don't enjoy carrying it, then you're probably not going to carry it. So a lot of people, they end up making a compromise, and instead of carrying something like that that's heavy and it has pliers, etc., they compromise and they buy something like this Ranger wood. Now I think the Ranger wood is great for people like in our circle that are into survival, bushcraft, fieldcraft, etc., especially those of us that watched MacGyver. And even though this has a lot of really cool options on it, etc., it still doesn't have everything that you can need. But as far as compromises go, I feel like something like this is a pretty good compromise. So what I find is that when I'm going to nice places where it's kind of not acceptable for me to have a fixed blade on me, I'll carry something like that in my pocket. And that's kind of like my church knife or my Gucci knife or whatever you want to call it. But I've got to say that when I go to events like that where I can't have a fixed blade knife, that I just feel naked for some reason, like I don't have enough, like I am not prepared. Which I've got to tell y'all, the whole entire end of the world thing, that happens because I am constantly prepared. Really, the whole thing hinges on me. If I have everything in my kit on me at all times, I promise you the end of the world won't happen. But what I find is when I'm missing the one thing in my kit, that's when the emergency always takes place. So y'all pray for me because I hold the world in the balance. Now, I would say the majority of the time, just being who I am and what I do and where I go, I'm always going to have a fixed blade knife on me. Now, what I have discovered is that over time, I gain more confidence in my abilities, and so that changes what I'm actually going to carry on me. And now William Collins, he is probably going to kill me for showing y'all this knife, but this is the newest offering that he has. This is called the Mighty Mini. William does not need anybody like me telling y'all to buy a knife from him. He is constantly behind because so many people want his knives. There's a lot of people in the industry that have William Collins knives, and I'm no different. I absolutely love these knives. There is one thing that I will say about William though. When I talk to William on the phone, number one, he listens. Number two, he observes. So he watches my videos, he sees what I do with them. He's seen me teach in classes, and so he knows how I use a knife. He also knows that I'm in different environments. I could be, you know, canoeing or in a kayak, or I could be down in the swamps. I could be up on the boundary waters in the winter. Now I'm going hunting and I'm skinning animals. Now I'm teaching people how to make fire friction sets. Now I'm doing escape, evade, gray man type stuff. Tomorrow I'm gonna be on a bike. I go into lots of different environments. I teach lots of different people, and so my needs are kind of unique to what I actually do. So I was really fortunate that he, you know, spent some time with me on the phone, and I was able to pick his brain, and the guy's extremely knowledgeable. And together we were able to come up with what would work for me. And that is what I would encourage you to do, is find somebody that you trust that can help you to make an adequate knife purchase. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over this knife, and I'm going to explain why this is the knife that I choose for my everyday carry now. So instead of starting with the knife like a lot of people are going to do, I'm going to talk about the sheath. You'll notice it's a Kydex sheath, and based on the way that the holes are set up, I could, if I wanted to, pair this with my Wazoo Viking Spark, and I could wear it around my neck. And because it has a tech lock on the back, I can change the configuration. I can wear this cross draw. I can wear this scout carry. I can wear it strong side. I can put it onto my pack. It basically gives me the most amount of options that I can have with this particular system. You will also notice that there is a drain hole, which is highly desirable in a sheath option. And something that William does phenomenally well is the fit on the blade itself. I do not have to worry about this knife coming loose. There's a positive lock every single time that I put it into the sheath. I don't have to worry about it coming out. Now you'll notice that right now I have it in cross draw, and there's a reason for that. Is because I prefer having it in front of me, because it's really easy if I sit down, if I get in a vehicle, if I want to lay in my hammock, if I'm bending down because I'm making fire or any of the tasks that cause me to kneel down. It's always accessible. I don't have to worry about missing the sheath if I wear it scout carry. I can positively identify the sheath, and I can put it in there without having to worry about cutting myself. I just find that when it comes to cross draw, it's the most comfortable, it's the most accessible, and it just works for me. If I'm trying to hide it, because it is a low profile knife, it also will go underneath my shirt, and it's hard for people to see that I'm actually carrying a blade. It's also not a huge knife. As you can see, up against this Tops Fieldcraft knife, this is a lot smaller, but I'm not really sacrificing a whole lot. This blade itself, I measured it, it's 3 inches long. Now, this knife is probably going to look pretty small in my hands because I have double XL hands, but you'll notice that it actually fits in my hand very well. And I really like the way that he has contoured this blade as well. It's just really got a great feel to it. Which also brings up, okay, well, what kind of material is the handle itself? I have lots of different types of materials here on the table, and what I can say through my experience is that I really prefer micarta. The main reason for that is when it gets wet or bloody, micarta actually gets a little bit grippier. So I think as far as, you know, a safety thing, that's really important. Somebody is going to notice the bow drill divot. I did that myself. That is not something that William does to his blades. This is a knife that I will be using for instruction, and so I'm considering this to be my mod to the knife. I don't have a single knife that doesn't get modded. The hardest part of a friction fire set is the bearing block. And so I just like having one because that's one less problem I have to worry about. Which brings us to the end of the knife. You'll notice that it actually has a hidden lanyard feature. Now I've got to be honest, I don't particularly care for that feature, so right here and right now I'm going to take it off just because of the way that I use a knife. But it's nice to know that you have that option in case you do want to rock a pinky lanyard. Also, if you carry this style of knife in your pocket, it makes it easier for you to grip something so that you can pull it out of the pocket. But I cannot think of any time where I actually carry the blade in my pocket. I just don't like carrying them that way. You'll also notice that the knife is full tang. In other words, the blade extends from the very tip to the very butt. And as far as the thickness of the blade, this is a 5/32 knife. And check out this 90-degree spine. Uh-oh. And now we can discuss the steel and the grind. This is a CPM steel. It's in 3V. That's pretty much an upgrade for William because he uses AEB-L, which is a stainless for some of his other knives. If you want to get a 3V version, that's an upgrade. What I can tell you from that is this is a high carbon steel. It has a relatively high Rockwell. This Rockwell is 60. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, that's pretty high. Well, I have some knives that are over 65 HRC. Those knives are ridiculous hard to sharpen. This knife is not. Now, what I find is that when you go down to something like 54, 55, that just doesn't work for me. The blade it gets dull too quick. A lot of people like that sweet spot between 58 and 59, and that's fine. I mean, knives that have that Rockwell are pretty easy to sharpen, and typically they're more forgiving as well. But with my experience, I like a little bit higher Rockwell. And I've got to say, like, instead of having to re-profile the blade all the time, I just simply maintain the blade. It is far easier to maintain a blade than it is to reprofile it. You will save yourself a ton of time if you will just take care of your blade. And the old adage is that the higher the HRC on the blade, then the easier it is for it to break or snap. But the truth is, at the place that I am in my journey now, I prefer to have somewhere between, I'm gonna say 59 and 61. So having a 60 HRC for me is perfect, but I know how to use the blade. Now somebody's gonna ask, well, what about the grind? Well, I've gotta be honest with you. My favorite grinds are saber grinds. A lot of people don't like saber grinds. Why? It's kind of a multi-tool grind. A knife is nothing more than a wedge. Okay, if you have a Scandi grind, then it's gonna split wood a lot easier than if you had a full flat grind. Full flat grinds, for example, are just good slicers. A saber grind is right in the middle of that. And so I find it's good for everything from making feathers to batoning firewood to meal prep, making trap triggers or primitive fire friction sets. And that's what the majority of the knives are here on the table. The majority of them are saber grinds, and that's just because I tend to favor them, especially when I'm going places where I just don't know what I'm gonna be doing. I consider it to just be a good all-around, do everything kind of grind. For me personally, a folding knife is more for convenience, and a full tang knife is more when you don't want to risk reliability. And I think that when it comes to everyday carry knives, that it is a compromise. You have to decide what is going to work best for you. In my case, this is going to work best for me. And having talked to someone like William, who helped me come to that determination based on my experience and his experience together, I know that that knife is going to work for me 90% of the time in an everyday carry setting. Now, obviously, it's not going to work for every single environment that I go to. It's not going to work for every single situation that I'm in. There are some strengths and weaknesses, right? I'm not Doug Marcotta. It will kill, not in my hands. In his, it definitely would. But can I use it? Yeah, for sure. I definitely can. As long as it was well placed and it was easily accessible, which it definitely is. But its main function is not fighting. Its main function is doing all the little things that I needed to do. And if I was placed into an actual survival situation, I would much rather have this than not having a knife at all. And like I said, my motto as a first responder is be prepared for the worst and hope for the best. And I feel like in my situation, this is the best compromise that I can come up with. So I definitely want to say thanks to William Collins for helping me out with this. This is the Mighty Mini. I think that they're on pre-order on the website. You can go and you can check it out on his website or go to his YouTube channel, WC Knives. I have been using WC knives for a little while now, and y'all know from having watched previous videos that I absolutely love using them. I'm really excited about this knife. I've been carrying it with me everywhere. I really like testing things out before I bring them to your attention because I don't want to. Trust is really important to me. That's what it all boils down to, is trust. I want y'all to trust me more than anything, and so I will not bring something to the table that I haven't used extensively and that I don't believe in. So in conclusion, when it comes to you choosing an EDC knife, you need to really consider what your preferences, your needs, and your wants are. And those may be different from mine. And if you don't know exactly what you need, then find somebody that you trust that can help you to make that adequate knife purchase. And the last thing I would say is you've got to get out there and you've got to train. Just because you have an expensive knife or the knife that your favorite, survivalist uses or whatever, that doesn't mean that you're going to be good with that knife. It takes experience, and you're only going to gain that by getting out there and earning your 10,000 hours. And once you get that 10,000 hours, then you're going to be like us, the guys that actually have done the 10,000 hours, and you're going to be able to pick up a blade and say, yeah, that's going to work, or no, it's not. And because of my experience, I could take any knife on this table and I could get out there in the woods and make it do the things I need it to do. But that takes time. So hey, get in the comments section. Let us know, like, what is your preference? Do you like a folder or do you like a fixed blade? I also want to know what knives worked for you in the past and some knives that have failed. And I can guarantee you that there's going to be some similarities in people's posts because I see certain knife brands fail all the time in the field. And I also know that there's going to be somebody out there that's going to post a comment of a really reputable knife company where that knife failed. So if you're hunting smack digging the video, then like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell, leave me a snide remark, and until next time, keep fueling those fires. If you're listening to this broadcast, you are the resistance. To stay in the know, subscribe to the new Survival Dispatch News channel.
Do it now!